From the very beginning, I knew my husband Jacob's family was complicated, but I never imagined just how toxic and suffocating their dynamic would become. Jacob was the golden child, the apple of his mother's eye, and their bond was so tight it felt like an unbreakable chain. Growing up, his father was always busy with work, leaving Jacob and his mother to spend nearly every waking moment together. She doted on him, showered him with attention, and made him the center of her world. But this closeness came at a cost. His sister, Sarah, was always pushed to the sidelines. I could see the resentment simmering beneath her surface, even if she tried to mask it with a smile. Jacob, ever the kind and protective older brother, tried to fill the void for Sarah, always being there for her, but it was never enough to heal the fractures in their family. When I first entered the picture, I thought I was just dating Jacob. I didn't realize I was stepping into a battlefield. Sarah and my mother-in-law had a way of making me feel like an intruder, an outsider who didn't belong. It started small little comments here and there, subtle digs that made me question my place in Jacob's life. But soon their behavior escalated into something far more sinister. Sarah, in particular, seemed to take pleasure in crossing every boundary imaginable. I'll never forget the first time she barged into Jacob's room while we were sleeping. There I was, half asleep and barely dressed, and she just waltzed in like it was nothing. She didn't even knock. She acted like it was perfectly normal to invade our privacy, chatting away about some random topic as if I weren't lying there mortified. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that siblings could be close, but deep down I knew this wasn't normal. When I confronted Jacob about it, he agreed to install a lock on his door, but that only made things worse. The next morning, Sarah tried to storm in again, only to find the door locked. She went ballistic, pounding on the door and screaming at Jacob to let her in. When he finally did, she turned her fury on me, calling me a skank and accusing me of coming between her and her brother. I was stunned. How could someone be so unhinged? But Sarah wasn't the only problem. My mother-in-law was a force to be reckoned with. At first, she ignored me completely, acting as if I didn't exist. But once she realized Jacob and I were serious, her attitude shifted from indifference to outright hostility. She treated me like I was stealing her son away, like I was some kind of villain in her twisted narrative. At family dinners, she would pointedly exclude me from conversations, her icy glare making it clear that I wasn't welcome. She even went so far as to call me stuck up and spoiled because my parents had sent me to a private school. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here she was, a public school teacher, judging me for my education. But the worst part was when she tried to talk Jacob out of marrying me. She told him he could do better, that he deserved someone more suitable. I'll never forget the look on Jacob's face when he told me about it. He was hurt, but he stood by me, assuring me that her opinion didn't matter. Still, it stung. How could someone who claimed to love her son so much be so cruel to the person he loved? Sarah, on the other hand, took her mother's lead and ran with it. She became my personal tormentor, always finding ways to undermine me. She would ask me invasive questions about my past, trying to dig up dirt to use against me. "Why did your ex break up with you?" She'd ask, her tone dripping with fake curiosity. "Were you not good enough for him?" She even had the audacity to compare me to Jacob's ex-girlfriend, saying she was much prettier than me. It was like she was playing some twisted game, trying to chip away at my confidence one cruel comment at a time. I tried to ignore her to rise above it, but there's only so much a person can take. One day I finally snapped. "You know what, Sarah?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I liked my ex's family better than yours because at least they weren't nosy and overbearing." The look on her face was priceless, but it didn't stop her from continuing her campaign against me. The breaking point came when Jacob proposed. You'd think they'd be happy for him, but instead, they were furious. Both Sarah and my mother-in-law reached out to me, telling me it was a huge mistake and that I should break off the engagement and return the ring. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Who does that? Who tries to sabotage their own family member's happiness like that? I told them in no uncertain terms that I loved Jacob and had no intention of leaving him. But their attacks didn't stop there. Sarah accused me of being a gold digger, saying Jacob deserved someone of higher status. She even threatened to expose me before the wedding, though I had no idea what she thought she was going to expose. It was also ridiculous, so over the top, but it was also incredibly hurtful. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, constantly under attack from the people who were supposed to be my family. Looking back, I can see how their toxic behavior was a reflection of their own insecurities and dysfunction. Sarah was desperate for her mother's approval, and my mother-in-law was obsessed with maintaining control over Jacob. But knowing that didn't make it any easier to deal with. Every day felt like a battle, and I was exhausted. Little did I know, things were about to get even worse. As our wedding day drew closer, the tension between Sarah and me became unbearable. What started as subtle jabs and invasive questions had escalated into full-blown hostility, and I could feel the weight of her resentment bearing down on me like a storm about to break. Jacob tried to reassure me, but even he couldn't shield me from the chaos Sarah was determined to create. It was as if she saw our wedding as a personal attack, a threat to her place in Jacob's life, and she was willing to do whatever it took to sabotage it. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a simple dinner. Sarah had invited herself over, claiming she missed Jacob and wanted to spend time with him. Reluctantly, I agreed, not wanting to seem like the villain. But as soon as we sat down, Sarah launched into a bizarre rant about cheating partners, calling them useless pieces of trash. At first, I thought it was just another one of her strange tangents, but then she turned to me, her eyes blazing, and asked, "How does it feel to be a useless piece of trash?" My heart stopped. Before I could even process what she was saying, she pulled out photos of me and a male coworker, Zach, accusing me of having an affair. I was stunned. The photos were completely innocent. Zach and I were close coworkers, but there was nothing romantic between us. Jacob knew this. He'd even met Zach's girlfriend. But Sarah twisted those moments into something ugly, something designed to destroy my relationship with Jacob. I could see the hurt and confusion in Jacob's eyes as he confronted her. "Why are you following her around? Taking pictures like some kind of stalker?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger. Sarah tried to justify her actions, claiming she was just protecting him from me, a supposed gold digger. But Jacob wasn't having it. He shut her down, telling her she was creating drama out of nothing. I was furious. How dare she invade my privacy, stalk me, and then try to turn Jacob against me? I threatened to file a police report, and for the first time I saw fear in Sarah's eyes. She begged Jacob to intervene, but he stood by me, telling her she should be grateful I was willing to let it go. It was a small victory, but it came at a cost. Sarah's accusations left a lingering shadow over what should have been a joyful time. But Sarah wasn't done. In the days leading up to the wedding, she became even more unhinged. She started showing up unannounced at our apartment, always with some excuse about needing to talk to Jacob. Each time, she'd make snide comments about our relationship, telling Jacob he deserved someone better and that we were completely wrong for each other. It was like she was trying to plant seeds of doubt in his mind, hoping they'd grow into something that would tear us apart. I tried to ignore her, to rise above it, but the constant attacks were wearing me down. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, constantly on edge, waiting for the next blow to fall. The final straw came when I overheard Sarah on the phone with one of her friends, bragging about how she was going to ruin the wedding. She didn't know I was listening, but her words sent a chill down my spine. "I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of person she really is," she said, her voice dripping with malice. I didn't know what she was planning, but I knew I couldn't let her get away with it. That night, I told Jacob everything. He was furious, but more than that, he was heartbroken. "I can't believe she'd do this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought she'd come around, but this is too much." The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be a joyful celebration, a moment to bring our families together before the big day. Instead, it turned into a nightmare, one that confirmed my worst fears about Jacob's family. My mother-in-law, who had insisted on planning the entire event, refused any help from us. "I'll take care of everything," she had said, her tone dripping with false confidence. But when we arrived at the venue, my heart sank. Plastic tablecloths, picnic tables, and cheap Mexican food, it was a far cry from the elegant evening we'd envisioned. The atmosphere felt more like a backyard barbecue than a rehearsal dinner for a wedding. I tried to keep my composure, but the disappointment was written all over my face. Things only got worse from there. My mother-in-law, clearly unhappy with how the evening was unfolding, spent the entire dinner sulking and drinking heavily. She made no effort to hide her disdain, muttering under her breath about how stressful the wedding planning had been. At one point, she even loudly declared, "I can't wait for this wedding to be over." The room fell silent, and I could feel the eyes of our guests shifting uncomfortably between us. I was mortified. This was supposed to be a celebration of love, but she turned it into a spectacle of resentment and bitterness. Jacob tried to intervene, gently reminding her that this was supposed to be a happy occasion, but she brushed him off with a wave of her hand. "You don't understand how much work I've put into this," she snapped, her voice slurred from the alcohol. It was as if she wanted everyone to know how much she resented us, how much she resented me. I felt like a stranger at my own rehearsal dinner, an outsider in a family that had never truly accepted me. The final blow came when my mother-in-law, emboldened by the alcohol, began making inappropriate comments to the guests. She started rambling about how Jacob didn't need her anymore, how he'd chosen me over his own family. Her words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. I could see the pain in Jacob's eyes as he tried to calm her down, but she was beyond reason. It wasn't until my father-in-law stepped in, his face red with anger, that she finally stopped. He grabbed her arm and practically dragged her out of the room, leaving behind an awkward silence that hung heavy in the air. As the guests began to leave, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, embarrassment, and a deep sense of betrayal. How could she do this to us? How could she ruin what was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of our lives? Jacob tried to comfort me, but I could see the guilt and frustration in his eyes. He knew this was his family's doing, and he knew there was no easy way to fix it. That night, Jacob and I had our first real fight. I told him in no uncertain terms that I couldn't handle his family's toxicity anymore. "If they come to the wedding," I said, my voice trembling with anger, "I'm calling it off." Jacob was shocked, but he knew I was serious. He promised to handle it, and the next morning he uninvited both his mother and Sarah. It was a painful decision, but it was the only way to protect our happiness. Little did I know, their schemes were far from over. After the wedding, the silence from Jacob's family was both a relief and a painful reminder of the rift that had formed between us. My mother-in-law and Sarah made no effort to reach out to me, as if I had ceased to exist the moment I married Jacob. It was clear they blamed me for everything, for Jacob's decision to uninvite them, for his refusal to tolerate their toxic behavior, and for the boundaries he had finally set. But while they cut me out completely, they still clung to Jacob, inviting him to family dinners and events as if nothing had happened. It was a slap in the face, a constant reminder that I would never truly be part of their family. Jacob tried to navigate the situation as best as he could, but it was clear the strain was taking its toll. He loved his family despite their flaws, and it hurt him to see how far things had fallen apart. Still, he stood by me, refusing to let them disrespect me any further. "You're my wife," he would say, his voice firm but tinged with sadness. "I chose you, and I'll always choose you." His words were comforting, but they couldn't erase the sting of knowing his family would never accept me. Months turned into years, and Jacob and I focused on building our life together. We worked tirelessly, saving every penny until we finally achieved our dream, buying our first home. It was a beautiful house, spacious and filled with light, a symbol of everything we had overcome together. We were overjoyed, but even in that moment of triumph, I couldn't shake the feeling that his family's shadows still loomed over us. Sure enough, it wasn't long before my mother-in-law and Sarah showed up unannounced for a housewarming visit. I wasn't home at the time. I had gone to visit my parents, but Jacob told me everything. They arrived with forced smiles and hollow compliments, pretending as if the past didn't exist. Sarah, ever the opportunist, made snide remarks about how lucky we were to have such a big house, while my mother-in-law subtly hinted that it was too much space for just the two of us. It was a not-so-subtle jab at our struggle with infertility, a topic they knew was a sensitive one for us. Jacob shut them down immediately, but the damage was done. Their visit was a reminder that no matter how far we moved on, they would always find a way to twist the knife. When Jacob told me about their visit, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. It was clear they hadn't changed. They were still the same manipulative, self-centered people they had always been. But I also felt a strange sense of relief. Their inability to let go, to move on, only highlighted how far Jacob and I had come. We had built a life together, one rooted in love and mutual respect, and nothing they said or did could take that away from us. Still, I couldn't help but wonder how long it would be before they tried to interfere again. Their visit felt like a warning, a reminder that they were always lurking in the background, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Little did I know their next move would be even more audacious, and it would force us to confront the toxicity head-on. Just when I thought Jacob's family couldn't possibly surprise me anymore, my mother-in-law proved me wrong. Out of the blue, she called me something she hadn't done since the wedding. Her tone was sickeningly sweet, a stark contrast to the venom she usually directed at me. "How are you, dear?" she asked, her voice dripping with fake concern. I was immediately on guard. This was the same woman who had ignored me for years, who had tried to sabotage my relationship with Jacob at every turn. I knew something was up. After a few minutes of small talk, she finally got to the point. "Sarah's pregnant again," she said, as if this were supposed to be good news. My heart sank. This would be Sarah's sixth child, and from what Jacob had told me, her husband was still unemployed, refusing to contribute to the household in any meaningful way. Sarah was drowning working multiple part-time jobs while her husband spent his days gaming, and yet, she kept bringing more children into the world. It was a cycle of chaos, one that my mother-in-law seemed determined to enable. Then came the bombshell. "Since you and Jacob don't have children," she said, her tone casual, as if she were discussing the weather, "I think you should give up your house for Sarah and her family. It's too big for just the two of you, and they really need the space." I was speechless. Did she really just ask me to hand over the home Jacob and I had worked so hard to build? The home we were still paying for? I could feel my blood boiling, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. She didn't even hesitate. "Of course I'm serious," she replied, as if her request were perfectly reasonable. "Sarah's family deserves a bigger house, and you don't need all that space." I couldn't believe the audacity. This wasn't just a request, it was a demand, one that showed just how little she respected me or my marriage. She even had the nerve to claim that Jacob had already agreed to it, which I knew was a lie. Jacob and I had always been open with each other, and he would never make a decision like that without consulting me. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. "This is our home," I said, my voice firm. "We're still paying for it, and no one is moving in without our permission. If you want to help Sarah, you're welcome to take her in yourself." My mother-in-law exploded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch as she accused me of being selfish and heartless. But I stood my ground. "If you're so concerned about Sarah's living situation," I shot back, "why don't you get a second job to help pay her bills? Or better yet, why don't you tell her husband to step up and take responsibility for his family?" The call ended with her screaming at me, but I didn't care. For the first time, I felt like I had truly stood up for myself, and it was liberating. But the battle wasn't over. Sarah called shortly after, her voice filled with rage as she accused me of being a gold digger and trying to ruin her life. I fired back, telling her that if anyone was a gold digger, it was her husband who refused to lift a finger to support his family. The tables had turned, and for once, I felt like I had the upper hand. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. My mother-in-law and Sarah weren't the type to back down easily, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were planning their next move. Little did I know, their next attempt to interfere would be even more outrageous, and it would force Jacob and me to make a decision that would change everything. When Jacob returned from his business trip, I knew it was time to confront the chaos his family had unleashed. I sat him down and told him everything about his mother's outrageous demand, about Sarah's venomous accusations, and about the emotional toll it had taken on me. Jacob listened in silence, his face growing darker with each word. When I finished, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "I had no idea," he said, his voice low and steady. "I didn't know they would go this far." The next day, Jacob called his mother. I could hear the tension in his voice as he confronted her about her lies and manipulation. "Why would you tell my wife that I agreed to let Sarah and her family move into our home?" he demanded. My mother-in-law tried to backtrack, claiming she'd only assumed he would be okay with it because of how close he was to Sarah. But Jacob wasn't having it. "You had no right to make that assumption," he said, his voice rising. "This is our home, and no one is moving in without our permission." End of discussion. But my mother-in-law didn't stop there. She began pleading with Jacob, telling him how desperate Sarah was and how much she needed his help. "You're her brother," she said, her voice trembling with fake tears. "You have to help her." Jacob's response was firm and final. "It's not my job to fix Sarah's life," he said. If you want to help her, that's your choice. But don't drag me and my wife into this mess. Sarah, of course, wasn't about to let things go without a fight. She called Jacob, screaming and crying, accusing me of being a gold digger and trying to tear their family apart. But Jacob stood his ground. "You've disrespected my wife for the last time," he told her, his voice cold and unyielding. "If you can't treat her with respect, then you don't deserve to be part of our lives." The final straw came when my mother-in-law and Sarah showed up at our house unannounced, banging on the door and demanding to be let in. I was alone at the time and I refused to open the door, reminding them that they were no longer welcome in our home. When Jacob arrived, he was furious. He confronted them head-on, his voice shaking with anger. "If you ever come here again," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "I will call the police. This is our home and you have no right to be here." That was the moment everything changed. Jacob had finally drawn a line in the sand and there was no going back. He cut off all contact with his mother and Sarah, refusing to let their toxicity poison our lives any further. It was a painful decision, but it was also a necessary one. For the first time, I felt like we were truly a team, united against the chaos his family had tried to bring into our lives. But even as we moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. My mother-in-law and Sarah weren't the type to give up easily, and I knew they would find a way to strike back. Little did I know, their next move would be even more shocking, and it would force us to take drastic measures to protect our peace. The final chapter of this chaotic saga began with a sense of clarity that I hadn't felt in years. After years of enduring my mother-in-law's manipulation and Sarah's relentless attacks, Jacob and I finally reached a breaking point. The last straw came when they showed up unannounced at our home, banging on the door and demanding to be let in. I was alone at the time and I refused to open the door, reminding them that they were no longer welcome in our lives. When Jacob arrived, he was furious. He confronted them head-on, his voice shaking with anger. "If you ever come here again," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "I will call the police. This is our home and you have no right to be here." That moment was a turning point. Jacob had finally drawn a line in the sand and there was no going back. He cut off all contact with his mother and Sarah, refusing to let their toxicity poison our lives any further. It was a painful decision, but it was also a necessary one. For the first time, I felt like we were truly a team, united against the chaos his family had tried to bring into our lives. The weeks that followed were a mix of relief and reflection. Without the constant drama from his family, Jacob and I were able to focus on each other and the life we had built together. We spent our evenings talking, laughing, and dreaming about the future, something we hadn't been able to do in a long time. It was as if a weight had been lifted off our shoulders, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. But even as we moved forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. My mother-in-law and Sarah weren't the type to give up easily, and I knew they would find a way to strike back. Sure enough, it wasn't long before we started hearing rumors from Jacob's cousins about their latest scheme. Apparently, Sarah had been spreading lies about me, claiming that I had manipulated Jacob into cutting off his family. She even went so far as to say that I was controlling and abusive, painting herself as the victim in all of this. It was infuriating, but Jacob and I decided not to engage. We knew that anything we said or did would only fuel their narrative, so we chose to focus on our own happiness instead. Over time, the rumors died down and life returned to a sense of normalcy. Jacob and I continued to build our life together, focusing on our careers, our home, and each other. We even started talking about the possibility of adopting a child, something we had both always wanted but had put on hold because of the chaos with his family. It was a new chapter, one filled with hope and possibility. Looking back, I can see how far we've come. Jacob's decision to cut off his family wasn't easy, but it was the right one. It showed me that he was willing to put our marriage first, no matter the cost. And while I still feel a twinge of sadness for the relationship he lost with his mother and sister, I know that it was necessary for our own well-being. In the end, this journey taught me the importance of setting boundaries and standing up for yourself, even when it's hard. It also showed me the strength of my relationship with Jacob. We've been through so much together, and each challenge has only brought us closer. As we move forward, I feel confident that we can handle whatever life throws our way together.